Chicago, Illinois, known for its architecture, deep dish pizza, vibrant music scene, and many famous landmarks, is also the home to some of America's most notorious criminals. H. Holmes, Al Capone, John Wayne Gacy. These men are forever ingrained in the city's dark history. But one man, on a warm July night in 1966, truly shook the community to its core.
Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today's video where we'll be discussing the crimes and the victims of Mr. Richard Speck. Just like last time, let's open the case file.
Richard Benjamin Speck was born the seventh of 8 children to Benjamin Franklin Speck and Mary Margaret Carbraugh on December 6, 1941 in Kirkwood, Illinois. His father was a packer for Western Stoneware in Monmouth, having worked previously as a logger and farmer. His mother was known as a teetotaler and very religious. Richard was very close to his father, and unfortunately, in 1947, Benjamin died of a heart attack at the age of 53. Richard was just 6 years old. 3 years after the death of his father, Richard's mother married Carl August Rudolph Lindbergh on May 10, 1950, in Palo Pinto, Texas. He was a traveling insurance salesman who had a criminal record spanning 25 years for multiple forgery and DUI charges. He was also known to be a heavy drinker, unlike Speck's father. Richard and his younger sister Caroline stayed with their married sibling Sarah Thornton in Monmouth so he could finish the 2nd grade. He returned to live with his mother and stepfather in Santo, Texas, which is located 40 miles west of Fort Worth, where he attended the 3rd grade. After a year of living in Santo, Richard and his family moved to Dallas, and over the span of 12 years, the family moved at least 10 times, usually to poor neighborhoods in the East Dallas area. It's been reported that Speck hated his stepfather due to him being mentally and physically abusive, constantly drunk, and frequently absent. Growing up, Speck was a very defiant child. He started drinking alcohol at 12 years old, and by the time he was 15, he was drunk almost every day. He even refused to wear the glasses that he needed to see and read his schoolwork. He had to take the 8th grade twice while attending J.L. Junior Long High School, partly because he was self-conscious of people staring at him, or even speaking during lectures. He started freshman year in 1957 at Kosher Technical High School and failed every subject. He dropped out the following year at the age of 16. Between 1960 and 1963, Speck worked at the 7-Up Bottling Company as a laborer in Dallas, and in October of 1961, while attending the Texas State Fair, he met 15-year-old Shirley Annette Malone. They started dating, and 3 weeks into their relationship, she became pregnant. They married on January 19, 1962, and moved in with Richard's sister Caroline and her husband. Richard was 21. She was 15. At around the same time, Speck's mother was now divorced and separated from Lindbergh, where he was now living in California. And this was also around the time Speck stopped using his stepfather's last name and went back to his biological father's name. While serving a 22-day jail sentence for disturbing the peace in McKinney, Texas, his daughter Robbie Lynn Speck was born on July 5, 1962.
In July of 1963, Speck was given a 3-year prison sentence for robbery and also for forgery charges. And he was also sent to prison for cashing in a coworker's paycheck of $44 and for also robbing a store for beer, cigarettes, and $3 in cash. Now, $44 may not seem like a lot of money to you guys, but remember, this is the 1960s. $44 back then is the equivalent of $443 in today's money. I would be upset too if somebody else cashed in my paycheck that much.
He was granted parole in 1965 after serving only 16 months at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas. A week later, on January 9th of 1965, he was arrested for attacking a woman in the parking lot of her apartment complex, wielding a carving knife. He fled after she began screaming and was apprehended by Dallas police officers. He was then charged with aggravated assault and was sentenced to 16 months in prison in Huntsville. But due to an error, he was released just 6 months later upon the completion of his parole violation sentence on July 2nd, 1965. After being released, he worked for the Patterson Meat Company as a driver, and despite having 6 accidents in the company trucks, he was fired for failing to show up for work. He'd only been working there for 3 months. In December, Speck moved in with a 29-year-old divorced woman who was also a bartender at his favorite bar, Jenny's Lounge, for a babysitting job for her 3 children.
By January of 1966, Shirley filed for divorce from Speck, and within that same month, he was arrested and charged with aggravated assault after stabbing a man at Jenny's Lounge. His mother, by some miracle, was able to hire a defense attorney and was able to lower the charges from aggravated assault to disturbing the peace. He was fined $10, which is $93 in today's money, and he was jailed for 3 days after failing to pay. This is the last time he would be in the custody of Dallas police.
On the 5th of March, 1966, Speck bought a car and used it to rob a grocery store, in which he proceeded to steal 70 cartons of cigarettes and then proceeded to sell them in the parking lot of the store. Police were able to trace the vehicle, which was abandoned, and a warrant for his arrest was issued. He was never apprehended. If he had been, this would have been his 42nd arrest by Dallas police alone. On March 9th, his sister Caroline drove him to the Dallas bus depot, where he took a bus to Chicago, Illinois. Speck stayed in Chicago for a few days with his sister Martha Thornton and then returned to his hometown of Monmouth, where he stayed with family friends. His brother was a carpenter and was able to find him a job sanding plasterboard. He moved to the Christie Hotel in downtown Monmouth on March 25th and spent the majority of his time drinking in the taverns. Sometime at the end of March, Speck and some acquaintances were detained overnight after he threatened a man with a knife in a tavern bathroom. On April 9, 1965, 32-year-old barmaid Mary Catherine Pierce was last seen leaving her job at a place called Frank's Place at 12:20 a.m. She was reported missing 4 days later on the 13th, and that same day, her body was found in a hog house behind her job. Her cause of death was a blow to her stomach that ruptured her liver. Speck was known to frequent Frank's Place. He even built the hog house she was buried in. Monmouth police briefly questioned him on April 15th while he was collecting his last carpentry paycheck. They told him to remain in town for further questioning, and on April 19th, they found that he left. Police found a radio and jewelry that belonged to a Miss Virgil Harris, which she reported missing, in his hotel room. On April 19th, Speck went back to stay at his sister Martha's second-floor apartment, located at 3966 North Avondale Avenue, located in the Old Irving Park neighborhood of Chicago. Richard told his sister and her husband a bogus story about having to leave Monmouth to avoid selling narcotics to a crime syndicate. Martha's husband was a veteran of the United States Navy and recommended that Speck should apply to work as a merchant marine with a letter of authority as an apprentice seaman. He got the job after a physical exam, being fingerprinted, and photographed.
Almost immediately after applying, Speck was part of a 33-man crew, a part of the Clarence B. Randall, which was an L6S B1 lake freighter. But the voyage was brief. On May the 3rd, he was airlifted by a U.S. Coast Guard helicopter to St. Joseph's Hospital in Hancock, Michigan, after he had contracted appendicitis. He underwent an emergency appendectomy.
In June, he returned to the crew of the Clarence B. Randall, on which he served until the 14th, when he got drunk and assaulted the ship's officers and was put ashore the next day. The following week, Speck stayed at the St. Elmo Flophouse located at East 99th Street and South Ewing Avenue. He then traveled by train back to Monmouth to visit 28-year-old Judy Liekanimi, a nurse aide who was going through a divorce, whom he befriended at St. Joseph's Hospital. On June 27th, she gave Speck $80 to help him until he found work. He then left to go back to stay with his sister in Chicago for the next 2 weeks. On Tuesday, July 12th, Speck went to the hiring hall and received an assignment for the SS Sinclair Great Lakes, an oil tanker in East Chicago that was just 30 miles away. But when he got there, he found out that the spot was given to someone else. He was driven back to the Maritime Union Hall, which was then closed for the day, and not having enough money for a hotel room, he dropped his bags off at a Shell gas station at 9954 South Torrance Avenue and slept in an unfinished house at East 103rd Street. The next day, July 13th, Speck picked up his bags and checked into the Union Hall. At 10:30 a.m., he grew tired of waiting for an assignment, and with $25 in his pocket, he walked east on East 100th Street and checked into the Shipyards Inn, a rooming house located at East 101st and South Avenue North. For the rest of the day, Speck was drinking in local taverns before assaulting a Miss Ella Mae Hooper at knife point. He took her to his room at the Shipyards Inn Tavern, where he then raped her and stole her .22 caliber Rome revolver. He then left, armed with her handgun, a switchblade, and dressed entirely in black. He had dinner at Kay's Pilot House and then returned to the Shipyards Tavern Inn to drink until 10:20 p.m. He then walked a little over a mile to 2319 East 100th Street.
Filipino exchange student nurse Corazon Amaral is asleep in her room with her dorm mates Nina Schmale, Pamela Wilkening, Marlita Gargulo, Patricia Matusek, and Valentina Passion when she's awakened by a knock at the door.
When she opens up the door, she is met with the barrel of a revolver in her face by a man dressed in black. Another one of her dorm mates is awakened, and the two nurses are moved across the hall into a larger bedroom. The man then wakes up the 5 remaining nurses and has them moved to the room as well. The man is Richard Speck. Speck then demands the nurses to give him all of the money that they have, which was $23 altogether. Lighting a cigarette, he tells them he is only robbing them and is traveling to New Orleans. He then takes the nurses into another large bedroom and proceeds to use his switchblade to cut a bedsheet into strips and ties their wrists behind their backs and their ankles together. Around this time, a door opens downstairs. It's Gloria Davy, another student nurse returning home from a date with her fiancé, in which they were celebrating her 22nd birthday. She proceeds to head upstairs, where she's eventually thrown to the floor and tied up by Speck. After some time, he walks over to Pamela Wilkening and takes her out of the bedroom. It was also around this time that two more nurses, Suzanne Ferris and Mary Ann Jordan, returned to the complex after a day of shopping. They are quickly taken by Speck into another room, where Ferris is strangled with one of her stockings and stabbed multiple times. The same with Jordan.
The other nurses hear the killings on the other side of the room, and then silence. Unfortunately, the night is far from over. Speck then heads into one of the bathrooms to wash the blood off of his body, and after coming back out, within 20 to 30 minute increments, he grabs a nurse one by one, takes them into separate rooms, and kills them either by strangling them, stabbing them, or slitting their throats. At some point, Corazon Amaral is able to shuffle herself under a bed and hide. Speck comes back into the room and finds only one nurse left, Gloria Davy. He takes her downstairs to the first floor and puts her on a couch, where he proceeds to rape her and then eventually strangles her to death.
Corazon is still under the bed, and 30 minutes after Gloria was taken out of the room and murdered, Speck returns to the room and turns on the light so he can rummage through each of their purses and throws them on the floor. One of them almost striking Corazon in the face. Not realizing there was one nurse left, he leaves 2319 East 100th Street and disappears into the night. After waiting 2 hours, Corazon crawls out from under the bed and finds all 8 of her friends dead. She then crawled out of the ledge of the second floor, shouting, "They're all dead. All of my friends are dead." The first police car arrives 20 minutes later. It was a little after 6 in the morning on July the 14th, 1966. Chicago police have arrived at the complex, which is described as a house of horror. Almost every single step they take inside makes a squishing sound due to the massive amounts of blood on the floors. Corazon Amaral is questioned by the police, to which she gives a description of the attacker. With her help, Chicago police sketch artist Otis Rathel sketches a portrait of the suspect. White male, about 25 years old, 6 feet tall with short or crew-cut hair, and a tattoo on the left arm that reads, "Born to Raise Hell." Within a matter of hours, the sketch is released to the press, and it's printed on every newspaper in Chicago. During the investigation, law enforcement proceeds to the Maritime Union Hall just across the street from the murder scene, and the officials give them a photograph on file of Richard Speck, which is a striking resemblance to the police sketch. Meanwhile, Speck is back at the local bars, a mere 4 to 5 blocks from the murder scene, where he's been drinking for most of the day. And while being drunk and disorderly, he notices that the radio playing at the bar is talking about the murders. He learns that he left Corazon Amaral alive. Feeling pressure that the police will apprehend him, he flees into the Skid Row neighborhoods of Chicago on Friday, July the 16th. Back at 2319 East 100th Street, investigators are able to successfully lift Speck's fingerprints from a doorway in the complex, and Corazon Amaral is shown a photograph of him, to which she positively identifies him as the murderer. His photograph is then shown to the public during a press conference by Chicago Police Superintendent O.W. Wilson. Within hours of the press conference, his face is printed in the newspaper, and Speck returns to his flophouse, where he slits both of his wrists with a broken wine bottle. He's eventually found by a patron and is taken by law enforcement to Cook County Hospital, and they drop him off at the emergency room. They have no idea that they dropped off the man responsible for the deaths of 8 student nurses. While prepping for operation, Dr. Leroy Smith notices his patient has a striking resemblance of a photograph in an article he was reading in the newspaper. And as he's wiping the blood off of the patient's arms, he notices a tattoo on the left arm. Born to raise hell.
And I didn't see it, but I did, I saw some blood on his left arm, which I moistened with my hand, and I wiped the blood away, and I saw this V, this large V.
The Chicago State Attorney's Office and the entire law enforcement command is notified, and they descend onto Cook County Hospital, where Richard Speck is finally arrested on July the 17th, 1966. Hey everybody, so you're probably wondering why I'm not wearing my suit and I don't have my evidence board behind me. As of the time I'm shooting this, on this day, I was having some camera and audio issues in the spot where I usually shoot the shots of me. So I'm currently recording through my phone. So from here on out, this portion will continue with the trial and the punishment, and also for this one we will be going into who the victims were towards the end of the video in the memorial segment. I've made sure that this doesn't happen again, and we will continue going in depth with why Speck committed the crimes that he did, and keeping my promise to shed light on the victims. Once again, I apologize, and it won't happen again. So, let's continue. The trial of Richard Benjamin Speck began on February 20th, 1967, under Judge Herbert C. Passion, and public defenders are assigned to defend him. Gerald Getty leads the defense team. The defense argues over 2 theories: reason of insanity and an alibi that he was somewhere else at the time of the murders. Judge Passion appoints a panel of psychologists to determine if Speck is mentally competent to stand trial. He's then diagnosed as a sociopath, which is not a disqualifier to stand trial, and they find him to not be legally insane.
I don't recall it exactly, but I think in general it was something to the effect that when I awoke, I saw blood in my hand. They tell me they have this evidence against me. I must have done it.
But he did not admit that he had done it.
No, he didn't admit he had done it. He just made vague references to the fact that if he had capital punishment, that they would never get him to the chair, that he would take care of it himself.
Do you believe that he might try to take his own life now?
No.
You don't
Why?
think he has suicidal tendencies?
No.
Why?
I just don't. It's a judgment.
His defense team also argued that he also was genetically wired differently, stating that he had what is called XYY syndrome. So, what is XYY syndrome? XYY syndrome was supposedly founded in 1965 by British cytogeneticist Patricia Jacobs, to where she conducted an experiment in Scotland's only security hospital for the developmentally disabled. In this experiment, she hypothesized that 9 of her patients, ranging from heights 5'7" to 6'2", had an extra Y chromosome in their karyotype. And apparently, having an extra Y chromosome in the standard male karyotype, you are more prone to more violent and aggressive behavior. Which, later on down the road, this theory was proved to be false. And this argument was later thrown out by Judge Passion.
The results of both studies is that Richard Speck does not have the XYY chromosome, that he is normal in that regard, that it is only XY, just as any other normal person has.
One of the only known and key details of the trial is when Corazon Amarao took the witness stand to testify. And when asked if the murder of her colleagues was in the courtroom, she got up from the stand, walked over to the defense table where Speck was sitting, pointed her finger at him, mere inches from his nose, and said, "This is the man." With Corazon's testimony, the fingerprints belonging to Speck at the crime scene, and the description of him given to police, the jury makes their decision. After 49 minutes of deliberation, Richard Benjamin Speck is found guilty of all charges. He is sentenced to death by electric chair on June 5th, 1967.
All I can say is we tried this case to the best of our ability. We feel that we tried it in the best traditions of the legal profession. The jury has spoken, and our only alternative now is a motion for a new trial, and all cases where the death penalty is given in this state must be appealed.
Bye.